Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, prioritizing public safety. The governor and a bipartisan group of lawmakers set some clear goals during the second week of the session.
This is a crisis that didn't start yesterday. It didn't start 4 years ago.
It's an all-hands-on-deck approach.
We have to get tough on crime.
And an update on the Mexican gray wolf captured after being spotted wandering our state. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham is laying out her public safety priorities for lawmakers during the 60-day session, and she's not alone. Coming up in about 15 minutes, we take you inside the Roundhouse to hear why a bipartisan group of lawmakers is working together on this issue. And New Mexico in Focus political correspondent Gwyneth Dolan speaks with Senate Minority Leader Gregory Baca to ask why he thinks new legislation isn't the answer to the state's crime problems. Another debate over public safety is being reignited at the Capitol after the string of shootings targeting lawmakers. The suspect charged with orchestrating that scheme will be held in jail until trial, but some lawmakers are questioning the process it took to keep him there. In about 25 minutes, I ask our line opinion panelists if the state's pretrial detention system needs an overhaul. But we start with another top story here in New Mexico this past week: the announcement that criminal involuntary manslaughter charges will be filed in the deadly shooting incident on the set of the film Rust. Let's get to the line. Welcome to our line opinion panelists. Joining me here in studio this week, we have Rebecca Latham, former New Mexico Cabinet Secretary and currently the CEO of Girl Scouts of New Mexico. Andy Lyman right to her left, a reporter at the Santa Fe Reporter. And TJ Trout across the table, he's radio host for KKOB AM and FM. It's great to have you all here. Now, late last week, the Santa Fe District Attorney's Office announced it would be filing involuntary manslaughter charges against actor Alec Baldwin and the armorer for the film Rust. This is all in response to the death of the film's cinematographer, Halyna Hutchins. She was killed when a prop gun being held by Mr. Baldwin went off. Now, Mr. Baldwin says he did not pull the trigger, but experts say that's not possible. Now, after investigating the case, the DA's office says there was clear negligence, we're going to focus on that word, that led to Ms. Hutchins' death. Now, TJ, how important is this that the prosecutors send a message, first of all, that this won't be tolerated as we try to grow New Mexico's film business? Is that an overall part of this here, that we got to send a note to the world here of how we do our thing?
Well, I think obviously there has to be a note sent to the world. Yeah. I was talking to UNM law professor Josh Kastenberg about this, though, and I trust pretty much everything Josh says, but he thought this was not a surprise. My question is, and I think
which part was not a surprise?
That the indictment was brought forth.
Okay.
He thought it was going to happen.
Okay.
But what about everybody else? This is what kills me. I just cannot understand. Pardon the use of the word. Sure. Who brought the live ammo onto the movie set? That's right. Who did that? Have we heard? I haven't heard. Nope. Who put the live ammo in the box that was supposed to be just dummy rounds? Who did that? Who loaded the gun? I assume it was Hannah Gutierrez-Reed that loaded the gun. Then it was David Halls who told Baldwin, "Cold gun," yelled out, "Cold gun." Mm-hmm. So, I'm looking at all of this and I'm going, okay, Alec Baldwin's an actor. Actors do what they're supposedly supposed to do and told to do. Mm-hmm. If I were in his shoes and I were being told, "Cold gun," number one, mm-hmm. and I was told that the armorer loaded this with blanks, dummy rounds, are you supposed to trust these two people leading up to it's your turn now? Right. And so, okay, these two people said everything is fine with this gun, so I should trust them.
That's right. That's right. Rebecca, let me go ahead and pick up on that. I mean, that's the standard operating procedure. You have someone who is hired to do these things, as TJ mentioned, to yell out "cold gun." One must assume an actor's head is about lines, setup, being an actor. Why should an actor be put in a position to inspect a gun?
I can't understand this at all. There's no industry standard that there is an expectation that actors also be armorers or also backup armorers. I think, there's a conversation about responsible gun ownership in real life, but then in the movies and film, there's a very clear line of who does what. Much like the military, you're responsible for this, you're responsible for this, you're responsible for this. There's no precedent or standard or expectation that's ever been published that the actor is also responsible for checking that out. Should the armorer be held responsible? In my opinion, sure, yeah. I mean, like, that was her job. Should the producer be held responsible? Yeah, because you're responsible for hiring the people to do their jobs. Should Alec Baldwin be criminally charged? I think that is a real stretch.
Yeah. Andy, a quote here for everybody. Mr. Baldwin's attorney, Mr. Baldwin had no reason to believe there was a live bullet in the gun or anywhere else in the movie set. He relied on professionals with whom he worked who assured him the gun did not have live rounds. We will fight these charges and we will win. It's interesting, SAG's take on this, certainly, it's one of their members, got to protect them, but there's something here, Andy, about a precedence that worries people. If Mr. Baldwin does not come out on the working end of this, where does that put actors in this? It's troubling on a lot of levels.
Yeah, I think especially for productions that happen in New Mexico, I think you started to touch on that earlier, is I guess there's probably lots of production companies out there that are looking at this and saying, well, do we want to go back and film in New Mexico? There's some incentives, obviously, but maybe not Santa Fe, right? So yeah, I think it does set precedent on a number of levels, but I think number one is going to be how many more productions show up here to shoot Westerns.
That's right.
I think New Mexico Film and Albuquerque Film are watching this extremely closely because they're going, this is oh my God, what happens next?
Right.
I mean, are we going to lose all this money that's coming into the state? Another thing that was brought up too is the possibility that this trial might be moved out of the county, just because of the huge amount of press that it's been getting and publicity. They're thinking, well, maybe they'll want to move it to a less populated area in the state.
Interesting how that would go. Rebecca, let me ask you this. First judicial DA, Mary Carmack Altwise, of course, she issued a statement with the charges, and there's been a little bit of pushback about her. This feeling that perhaps she's positioning herself for a political run, or that she's using this situation to increase her name recognition. She's doing her job. I mean, she can't do nothing. So how do we look at how she's doing her work?
Well, I think it's right that people are questioning that. I don't know anything about her other than this. I've never heard her name before, so it's kind of hard to say, like, well, this is a pattern. This is like that she goes for these big cases, big names. Because again, before this, she was unknown, at least in my circle. But I think it's good for us to question that, because the logic of charging Alec Baldwin with a crime is just so strange to me. The one thing that I will say that is leaving just a tiny little bit of doubt for me is, why would he say he didn't pull the trigger? Like, if he said he didn't pull the trigger, but he actually did, and apparently now the FBI even backs up that he did, there's no way that gun fired without the trigger being pulled. Why would you lie about that? Yeah. Especially if there was no reason that he should have known that it was live ammunition. Like, you be honest from the very beginning. Maybe he didn't remember pulling the trigger. Maybe, there's all kinds of tricks that the human mind can play on us in that situation. But that's one part that's leaving me just a little bit like, well, maybe he's not as innocent as we think he is.
Well, and reminder was that Colt 45. The FBI has that gun now, and there's a question, guys, of whether if you just pull the hammer back, is that something that would set the gun off versus pulling the trigger? I can see where, Mr. Baldwin's trying to thread the needle, Andy Lyman, but I'm not sure if that's going to be ever figured out. What do we do about what TJ mentioned earlier? We don't know, and the DA has said she's not terribly concerned how that live ammunition got on set in the first place. It seems like we should be backing way, way, way up here and looking at the entire protocol about how we do these things, because something just doesn't feel quite right here.
I mean, on one hand, I would sort of expect some of these things to start coming out as we see the charges actually filed in court, right? There's a whole criminal process that goes, or criminal trial process and hearing process that goes with this, right? We need to we need to actually show, either through a grand jury or a hearing, that there is enough evidence to actually move forward with a trial on this. So we're still in the very beginning stages of that, and then of course there's discovery and all those things. So that question, that may come up again, but everybody I've talked to about this says, well, why is there a bullet around anyway?
Right. That Colt I mentioned that was used in the shooting is now in the hands of the FBI, of course. And the Bureau carried out a search warrant against the Albuquerque ammunition business that sold the rounds, TJ. That is PDQ Arms and Props. Now, if prosecuted, consequences for a company that sold the rounds? That's an awfully tough thing to kind of stitch together, it would seem to me.
Well, it seemed.
Unless it was some
Again,
intent. I mean, I
the
don't know.
culpability is, who sold the live? Are you talking the live rounds or the dummy
Yes,
rounds?
The live rounds, yeah. Exactly.
Again, like you said, all this has to come out in discovery. I mean, this is so important to this entire case. We got to get to from the beginning. We got to get to the bottom of all of this. Another thing I also thought of: why in the world are they using real guns on sets anymore anyway? Why not rubber guns? Why not wooden guns? You don't need, with special effects these days, you don't need real guns anymore.
I should mention Seth Kenny is the owner of that company. He says he provided 50 dummy rounds. So he denies that the rounds found on set and seized by authorities as part of that investigation came from him, Rebecca. So we have his word there, and the FBI is still working through this, and we understand that. Let's kind of come back to where we started here with Alec Baldwin. Is there anything, Mr. Baldwin, is this a question of Alec Baldwin being just too famous here? And it just, do you know what I'm trying to say here? It just, yeah.
That is, I think, in my opinion, that's what it's looking at. Like if this were, I think the big misjustice is the amount of public resources that are going to go into fighting this on behalf of the citizens of Santa Fe County.
That's right.
Because when the DA goes out there and says like this is like he was criminally negligent, not just criminally negligent, he was guilty of a crime that like his attorneys, he's got the resources to fight back, and so she's not going to. If she can find the evidence, she's not going to. Gosh, I'm like completely just lost my train of thought. She's not stepping back.
That's right. It's going to be interesting, and I'm curious if any of the local channels are going to carry the trial live. That would be fascinating to watch, wouldn't it? To have all that stuff come out, and like Andy was mentioning, that would be really interesting. Thanks to our Line Opinion panel. We'll be back here at the round table in just about 10 minutes to discuss the debate over pretrial detention that's reignited in the legislature.
Wolves moved north of I-40 and they are attacking livestock. There's nothing landowners can do about it because they're fully protected under the act. And this wolf moved north into an area and settled on private land. And after 14 days, it was pretty obvious it wasn't going to move back down south. And at the request of the landowners, we've captured it, and it's currently in a pen at our Sivietta National Wildlife Refuge.
We're about 2 weeks into the 60-day legislative session in Santa Fe, and there are some early signs of bipartisanship. Wednesday at the Roundhouse, a group of Democrats and Republicans from both chambers gathered inside the governor's office to address the state's public safety problems. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham led the press conference, but she wasn't the only one putting ideas on the table.
As an elected leader, as a parent, as a longtime native New Mexican, I am hurt personally, intellectually, and emotionally about what is occurring around the world, in our country, and more specifically, what's happening in my backyard. No New Mexican, no mother or father, no grandparent should be worried about what the day looks like when their child goes to school. Nobody should be fearful about going to their workplace. We started our workplace a little bit late this morning because we went to yet another break-in to one of our state buildings. Every day, everywhere, somebody is experiencing a public safety or crime issue in every single corner of our state. Not only is it untenable, it's unacceptable, and we are all now taking that not only from a policy perspective. There isn't anybody in this room who doesn't take that personally.
I'm not just here to represent the city of Albuquerque. I was born and raised in Taos, New Mexico. And what I learned weeks ago when I visited my hometown, and I spoke to my relatives who are first responders, and I saw what struggles they're going through with the unhoused, with drugs, with violence. It sounded too familiar to what we're doing, what's going on in Albuquerque. And I commend the governor for acknowledging that this is a problem that is concerning for all of the state of New Mexico and every person who lives here. And as chief of police of the largest agency in the state of New Mexico, I'm here to first say that I don't need every single person to stay in jail. I've said it before. I have family members who are drug addicts. They need help. They need resources to get off of their addictions. I have family members who have mental health issues. They need mental health resources and they need help in the areas of mental health. But I have a sister who works at Walmart, and I shouldn't worry that every day that there's the potential that somebody who's committing retail theft is going to point a gun at her trying to steal $50 worth of product. We have to get tough on crime.
This is a crisis that didn't start yesterday. It didn't start 4 years ago. This is many years in the making. And I agree with you, Governor. There is a deep bench of leaders in this room and even outside this room who are willing and ready to get to work to begin the process of undoing a lot of the bad things that led us to this crisis.
If you, I think, ask everyday New Mexicans, crime, if it's not at the top of the list, it's very, very near. It's in the forefront of every New Mexican's mind. So from my perspective, it's an all hands on deck approach, right? This is one area where I think we need to be serious when we say we put politics aside. Let's evaluate each idea, each proposal. If it has a good idea that fixes a problem, let's get it done. So I know that's going to be my caucus's approach. Again, and I think, and I appreciate the governor's remarks when she used the words discourse and debate. You don't want an echo chamber. It's not good for the people of New Mexico. And so we want legislation to be refined as it goes through. And I know we're going to be a part of that process as well.
Again, this is not a crisis that started overnight. Many of us remember the behavioral health system being decimated 10 years ago or so, and what that led in many ways to the situation we have here today. That's why the House and the Senate and this governor will continue to make investments in critical programs like behavioral health, housing. Those of you in Albuquerque know how critical housing is. Treatment programs. How many of you have had a loved one or a friend who is in need of detox or treatment, and it is nearly impossible sometimes to find the services? As well as supporting our law enforcement agencies, starting with our first responders and law enforcement, all the way through our DAs, our courts, our public defenders, and everyone involved in the judiciary.
Not every single person in this room agrees with every single effort by any number of these bills. Typically, when we all come together, that's what we're not trying to present. We're trying to show that we're all together, we have a plan. The Democratic leadership, I'll be a little partisan, sir. We got it, we got the votes, we're going. We are building a public safety investment strategy for the short term and the long term in the state. That's going to take every single one of us every single day in a number of ways, and we're going to work collectively to get as many of the best ideas up here as possible.
As far as, things that Republicans are working on that I think will help combat some of our career criminals that I know we can work with our Democrat colleagues, there's a few that come to mind. One, we've got to stop felons being able to acquire firearms. It's not a political issue. If you're a felon, there's no way you should be able to get a hold of a firearm. It's not even a Second Amendment issue.
This is a matter of getting tough on the right people, and people who provide firearms to criminals should face consequences. Everybody here is on the same page. People who should not have firearms should not be affected by the Second Amendment. We are here to be tough on crime, keep people in jail, and make Albuquerque and the rest of the state of New Mexico safe for everybody.
Our first responders and our police officers are not safe in this climate, straight up. And yet we're asking them to do more with less in many contexts around the state. And I say that while also saying at the same time, this legislature, by far than any other state in the country, has done more about investing in a public safety infrastructure. And when you look at the per capita numbers, there's just no comparison anywhere in the country. So that is also a bipartisan issue that sometimes gets lost. But if we're making all those investments and it still isn't better, we must do more.
It's tragic that mass shootings have become a regular part of everyday American life, but we finally have the power to do something about this in New Mexico. Saving lives should be something we can all agree on, including a 14-day waiting period to access firearms, to close a loophole on those abusing the background check system, especially domestic violent offenders. I hope my colleagues will join Representative Serrato and others and me in taking this bold and common sense step to save lives by banning the sale of assault weapons in New Mexico and extending this access period for those abusing the system that exists.
We have had mass shootings in this state, and we readily forget about them. We should not. And the notion that those risks aren't real here is flat wrong. And the fact that you can convert a firearm and that they're readily available and that weapons of war have no place in the day-to-day work of our society is an issue we have to debate vigorously and figure out a path forward. This may be the most robust group of leaders ever thinking about ways to tackle this issue by making it not about crime, but about a public safety environment that wins the day, that makes a difference in every aspect of our society and for every opportunity.
Shortly before that press conference inside the governor's office, New Mexico in Focus political correspondent Gwyneth Dolan caught up with the Republican leader in the Senate, Greg Baca. He says new legislation isn't the answer here.
Senator Baca, the Democrats this week are pushing a suite of gun proposals they say will help reduce violent crime. How would you approach the crime problem New Mexicans are experiencing right now?
You know, we have laws on the books right now that just aren't being enforced. I think we go back to the existing law, we enforce those on the books, and I think that's our safest bet right now. I think one of the things, it's interesting that you chose this location for this interview, but we're surrounded by the Constitution. And in that Constitution, it outlines the gun provisions and our lawful right to bear arms. And I think that I have some serious, and I believe many members have some serious concerns with the bills coming forward and whether or not they are constitutional and can move past that scrutiny, and I just have serious doubts about that right now.
Now, violent crime is one issue, but part of their argument is that the Department of Health says we have an 81% higher rate of kids killed by guns here in New Mexico. How are we supposed to respond to that problem?
You know, often we hear these types of arguments, tugging at the heartstrings, focusing on one area. We're all for child safety, and I think everybody can get behind that. There's always a balance in public policy, though, whether or not, are we going to enact laws that severely restrict people, or are we going to keep people safe? I think we have that balance now. The last thing that we want to do is go after law-abiding citizens and make them felons or criminals by enacting a statute that, frankly, is just unconstitutional.
We've seen an unfortunate uptick in mass shootings just in the past week. We've been very fortunate here in New Mexico to not have these issues here recently, but is there something we can do to prevent the kinds of things that we're seeing in California right now?
You know, those are really deep societal issues that I think we need to get into. Things like reinforcing the nuclear family and education and those types of things. What we have is answers that really just restrict law-abiding citizens. If I'm a felon out on the street and I have a criminal justice system in the state of New Mexico that frankly I just laugh at because they're going to let me out of jail, I'm not going to obey those anyway. I'm going to keep my gun, and guess who's going to turn in all their guns and restrict their magazines and abide by the law? The regular citizen, you and I, and the public at large. We're going to be the people that obey those laws. Felons are going to continue about their business. Criminals are going to continue about their business, and that's what makes these types of laws ineffectual.
We've had some high-profile shootings recently that involved guns that were bought illegally. Mm-hmm. Is there anything more we can do to get these illegal guns, not the responsible gun owners, but these illegal guns off the street.
See, and I think you're referring to laws on the books again, laws on the books. And unlike the laws that we're looking at now, those impact criminals and felons. They shouldn't have those weapons anyway. And if they're stolen, well, then they're in violation of a separate law by having stolen property. And so that's what we need to go after there, is we need to go after those types of situations rather than everyday folks minding their own business, enjoying their constitutional right that's outlawed, that is outlined in our Constitution here in New Mexico as hunting, fishing, hunting, defense, and any lawful purpose. That's what it says. As long as you're carrying on about your business lawfully, you should be unbothered.
You can watch all of our coverage from the Roundhouse on the New Mexico in Focus YouTube page. That includes Gwyneth's conversation with State Representative Pamela Herndon about her bill that would require parents to safely secure guns in a home with children. Now, for now, welcome back to our Line Opinion panelists. We're shifting our attention to the legislature now after the governor announced her public safety priorities for the session. As we expect now, the governor brought up the state's pretrial detention process. It's been debated for more than a year now, but there doesn't seem to be a consensus on how to move forward. The high-profile shooting scheme targeting lawmakers pushed the conversation back into the headlines this week after a judge decided to hold that suspect in that case in custody until trial. And State Senator Joseph Cervantes, I should add from Las Cruces, says that evidence that judges already have the discretion they need to hold defendants in jail when it's appropriate as they await trial starting broadly. Andy, do you agree with the senator? I mean, he has a bit of a point here. There's a reason other people are pushing for this. Where's the middle ground here?
I mean, I think he brings up a good point about the Arnold tool, which is not necessarily designed to say should or shouldn't they stay
Explain the Arnold tool if you would.
So yeah, it's a tool that the Supreme Court state Supreme Court came up with to say when we did this bail reform, it was a big constitutional amendment, and they added this tool that's sort of just to gauge of how dangerous this person is, right? How much supervision they should have. Right. But the ultimate decision is always up to the judge. There's nothing that says they have to, look at the Solomon Pena case. It didn't say this guy should be released. It said if he's released, this is the level of supervision he should have.
Rebecca, Senator Cervantes, I mentioned, vocally opposed to one specific idea, legislation that would create a rebuttable presumption of dangerousness for defendants charged with certain violent crimes. That means defendants would have to prove they aren't a danger in order to be released ahead of trial. Any dangers in your gut about that philosophy that jumped to the surface?
About him not wanting to entertain the idea of rebuttable presumption again? To go back to the Arnold tool, I think it's deeply flawed. I think the intent to have it was good. I appreciate that Senator Cervantes is acknowledging that it has many faults. Sure. I didn't even know until the Solomon Pena case that judges did have the ability. I thought it was like, okay, well, you plug these numbers in, boop, 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 boop. Like it's going to tell you, put in jail or let back out. I think personally, I'm still a big fan of if you're in jail in the first place, it is your responsibility to prove that you're not a flight risk, that you're not a danger to society. I know that is not fair in every case, but in Albuquerque and in New Mexico, when even the governor and the leaders of the Democratic Party are saying crime is the most important thing on everybody's mind, I think we have to step back, get off of the soapbox we were on last session about no, we are not going to entertain rebuttable presumption. Do it. Just get it done for the people because we are sick and tired of being victims.
Pick up on that. Yeah. People want something done about crime here.
See, one of the questions that should be a part of the Arnold tool, by the way, I think they should change the name of that, but one of the questions I think should be your ability to use a saw to saw your ankle monitor off. What is the propensity of you going to be doing that when you get out? Look, they call judges for a reason because they're supposed to be smart. They're supposed to be able to make conscious, rational decisions on what to do with our accused criminals and our criminals, and so they should have the power to make that decision. The Arnold tool is a tool. That's all it is. It is not the end all of how the decision decision should be made. And I think, and I agree with Rebecca, I think it's seriously flawed, because I was thinking, just for instance, say somebody's been a Boy Scout their entire life, or a Girl Scout, their entire life. You know, they've given to charity, upstanding citizen, you know, participated in the community, and then one day they snap, pick up an AR, and they go shoot up a big box store.
Not a Girl Scout.
Not a Girl Scout would never do that, right? Maybe a Boy Scout. But what I'm saying is, none of that might register on the Arnold tool, because this person has a pure as the driven snow history, but it didn't show up. I think that's why it's flawed. I mean, I may be misconstruing the Arnold tool here, but
I think, though, as I understand it, as explained to me by Raul Torres, not to me personally, I was listening to him speak, that, you know, one of the big indicators is if you've been convicted of a gun crime, then it's like 3 points. If you were never convicted because your case never went to trial, because the prosecutor never got their poop in a group to get you to trial, then you've never been convicted. Therefore, you get a 0 on the danger scale. Yes, so that conviction part, I think, and again, this is how I understand it. But it's the logic of that it's flawed.
Yeah. Andy, a little related idea, this idea of bail reform. Senate Majority Leader Peter Wirth, one of several Democrats, opposed to major bail reform changes without their support. Does the governor have a chance here? I mean, she really has laid out a lot of changes she wants to see on this side.
It's going to be tough. There's lots of, or a good number of lawmakers that kind of are going off of the basically Constitution, saying it is up to the prosecutors of the state to prove the dangerousness. It shouldn't necessarily. I mean, based on the Constitution, it's not up to the defendant to prove that they didn't do it. Right? It's the state's job to prove that they did. And I forget this quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's been repeated over and over again. You can attribute it to lots of different people, but this idea that it's better to let a guilty person go than lock up an innocent person, right? And so it's sort of, I think it's based on the Constitution, and I think there's a lot of criminal justice lawyers in the legislature, as well as people that have that mind that they're going to sort of really question that. Peter Wirth told me specifically when I interviewed him that he said, he said on a number of things, never say never, but that he's really got to look at this and do a hard look at this. And so, I think it's going to be hard for the governor to get
Interesting. I appreciate the amount of detail there, Andy, because for TJ, quote from Senator Wirth right here: "There's a number of things on the crime front we need to do. I don't support adding new presumptions that I think would result in thousands of people being held that don't need to be held," end quote. Is that a reasonable fear from the senator?
Sure. Yeah. There's also a reasonable fear that a lot of us live our lives in danger walking down Central Avenue downtown at night, too. Right. So, I mean, that's why we have to reach some kind of a happy medium here. I'm going to say one more thing about the Arnold tool, because I've talked to current serving judges and retired judges about this. And both of them have said you can't rely solely on the Arnold tool. And if you are, as a judge, relying solely on the Arnold tool to make your decisions, you're being extremely lazy. Wow. This is not me. This is judges saying this.
Yeah. Interesting. Are we going to get another look at the Arnold tool? You never know in this session. I mean, these high-profile cases unleash things like this, and we get a harder look.
But for Senator Wirth to say thousands of people, I mean, is that accurate? Is New Mexico so dangerous now that we have thousands of people that could potentially be held when they shouldn't be? I mean, I think we have, without a doubt, we have seen homicides as a result of someone who should have been being held until their hearing, they were let out because the judge deferred to the Arnold tool, and then in that case, they commit a very dangerous crime, killing someone. So if I get the better to release a guilty party than to hold an innocent one, but what about the people who are then harmed? I don't envy them. I have my opinions, but I don't envy.
It's a hard one. Andy, I'll finish up with you on this. Let's not forget the bill creating a rebuttable presumption failed in the legislature last year. And I'm curious why are the dynamics that different to give it a better chance this year? I'm not quite seeing it. I'm curious what you're saying.
I'm not quite sure either exactly. I mean, on the other hand, legislation that passes more often than not has been through numerous times, right?
Right.
I mean, there's
That's a fair
another
point.
philosophical idea of laws is that, or bills, is that it's not going to be the best if you pass it right away. Sometimes you have to sort of present it to these lawmakers over and over again and maybe make some tweaks every year. We saw the same thing with cannabis legalization, right? It changed so many times, but at the time we finally got it, because it just takes a long time for people to sort of come on board.
That's the perspective we're looking for. Good stuff right there. Thanks again to our panelists. We'll be back for one final discussion about 10 minutes to talk about term limits and if lawmakers should consider them as they debate changes to modernize the way our legislature functions. But first, an update to the Mexican gray wolf seen wandering New Mexico. You might have read about this. In December, the young female left her pack in southeastern Arizona and traveled through New Mexico, crossing I-25 and I-40 multiple times. That's amazing, as she headed north looking for a mate. Our Land's Laura Paskus has been watching the wolf's progress the past few weeks. She spoke with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Mexican Wolf Recovery Coordinator, Brady McGee, Monday morning when he told her the wolf had been captured over the weekend. Laura asks why the wolf was captured and what might happen next.
Brady McGee, thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Appreciate being here. Thank you.
So we're talking Monday morning. Big news is that a female wolf from southeastern Arizona has been making her way through New Mexico the past month or so. Can you give us a little update on where she is and where she's been traveling?
I can give you an update. In fact, we captured her yesterday and moved her to our Sibieta pen. She was traveling up in northeast New Mexico about 90 miles north of I-40, about 15 miles east of Angel Fire, kind of settled in that area, and has been up there for most of the month of January. And so, as of yesterday, anytime a wolf moves north of I-40, our protocol is to monitor it for at least 14 days. Let it see if it will move back south of I-40 on its own. Our main recovery program is trying to recover wolves south of I-40, and so any wolves that move north of I-40 are fully protected under the Endangered Species Act. South of I-40, we have 10J population with reduced regulations so that we can more effectively manage wolves, especially a large predator that eats livestock. And so when wolves move north of I-40 and they are attacking livestock, there's nothing landowners can do about it because they're fully protected under the act. And this wolf moved north into an area and settled on private land. And after 14 days, it was pretty obvious it wasn't going to move back down south. And at the request of the landowners, we've captured it, and it's currently in a pen at our Sibieta National Wildlife Refuge.
And so what will happen to her next?
So she will go back out into the wild. We have several different options. She originated in Arizona out of the Prime Canyon Pack. And so one of the things that we are looking at is putting her together with a mate right now and releasing her back out into the wild in April. We could put her back out into the wild in Arizona, or we could translocate her to Mexico and release her into the wild down there. Part of this recovery program is establishing a second population in Mexico, about 150 miles south of the border of the Arizona-New Mexico border. And right now the population down there is about 30 to 40 individuals. So we're really trying to boost the population down there. Our population here in the U.S. is around 200 individuals. And so we're doing fairly good here in the U.S., but we're still trying to bolster the population down there. And so right now she is in captivity. Her genetics are actually not very good. They're pretty redundant. She's pretty inbred. So we are looking at selecting a mate for her that would give us the best genetics and the best contribution in the wild. I'm worried that if we were to just take her and translocate her directly to the wild, that she would, we can't control who she mates with, and she might select somebody that perpetuates bad genetics. And so we are trying to bolster that genetics by selecting a mate for her, and then we will release her back out in the wild in April before she dens and has pups.
So just to back up a little bit, when she left Arizona in December, what was she doing? What was she looking for?
So she is a 1-year-old female that is dispersing from her natal pack, which is pretty common for 1-year-olds. Sometimes the females will stick around till they're 2 years old and kind of help out with the pack and help raise the offspring the next year. But a lot of times, most wolves disperse about 1-year-old. They go look for new territories, look for new mates. And so she traveled over 350 miles, crossing New Mexico, moving north up. She actually crossed I-25 near Civieta National Wildlife Refuge, went over towards, crossed the north part of White Sands Missile Range, went over toward the Manzano Mountains, and crossed I-40 a couple of times, just kind of east of the Edgewood area, the East Mountains. And so she was looking for new territories, looking for new mates, and where she landed and established up in northern New Mexico, just east of Angel Fire, there's no other wolves up in that area. It is right now is the prime mating season, and so there was a lot of concerns about her just getting in trouble, connecting or getting together with feral dogs or ranch dogs or anything like that. So she up in that area, she is not contributing to recovery and is likely to get in trouble. So that's part of the decision of capturing her and moving her back down south into the recovery area.
So we've talked about this sort of I-40 boundary, and as I understand it, south of the boundary, livestock owners can harass or haze wolves away from their livestock. North of I-40, the full protections of the Endangered Species Act prevent that from happening. So how did that I-40 boundary, how was that decided upon?
So under the Endangered Species Act, when we designate a 10J, we have to draw lines on the map. The Endangered Species Act says you got to draw the line somewhere. And most of the time, whenever we do 10J to reintroduce an animal and draw those lines on the map, we draw it around their historic range. And the historic range of the Mexican wolf is south of I-40, all the way down through south central Mexico. So historically, 90% of the Mexican wolf subspecies population occurred in Mexico. And so because of that reason, the boundary was drawn at I-40.
How does the Fish and Wildlife Service try to focus on the recovery of the species with so much controversy on all sides?
It is a very controversial program. I don't know of too many other programs throughout the country that are more controversial. I mean, you got northern grays and grizzly bears, but Mexican wolves are right up there with the most controversial species try to recover, and it makes it very difficult because we're really trying to find the balance of growing a population and also at the same time offsetting the impacts that it has on the livestock industry. And so one of our primary goals of this program is to try to manage and reduce livestock depredations when they do occur through the Southwest. So we've got a number of tools, a number of partners. We partner with Arizona Game and Fish, New Mexico Game and Fish, USDA Wildlife Services, Forest Service, BLM, Park Service. We've got a lot of partners in this program, and each one of them, we're all working together. We're contributing money to range riders, to all sorts of hazing and harassing techniques to prevent depredations. We can't always prevent it. A lot of times we can, though. And so we spend a vast amount of time, effort, energy, staff, personnel, resources to reduce livestock depredations as part of the program. It's one of our primary goals, because without that, we won't have the social tolerance or the tolerance to be able to recover wolves here in the Southwest.
And so do you feel like over the course of the program, and by having these measures in place, have ranchers in southwestern New Mexico become more tolerant of wolves?
Some have and some haven't. And I don't think some ever will. But I think there are a number of ranchers out there that we're working with that are altering their operations, that are using our preventative measures, that are trying to really work on ways of offsetting the impacts. And we have a lot of cases where we've got wolves denning with livestock, around livestock, and a lot of packs that are not depredating on livestock. And so a lot of the measures are working. It's never going to be foolproof. There will always, wolves will eat cows. Their primary prey source is elk. And so whenever they are hungry, or if it's easier to kill a cow and they're in that area, they're going to do so. But if we can haze them, harass them, teach them not to, and to stay away from cows, then that's one of our primary goals.
Brady, thank you so much. I appreciate you talking me through this controversial topic.
Sure. Thank you.
Welcome back to our panel for one final discussion on modernizing the state legislature. We've told you about the recent poll released by Common Cause New Mexico showing a majority of voters in New Mexico support changes like lengthening sessions, growing legislative staffs, and paying lawmakers, believe it or not. Now a new bill is proposing term limits for state senators and representatives. There are a few schools of thought on this, certainly. There are those who feel incumbents have a firm advantage in our system without term limits, and that adding them inherently creates a better representation. But there's also an argument that if and when a community finds a leader who represents their interests, term limits will eventually force them out earlier than they might want. Now, recognizing this, TJ, a lot of nuance here. Do you think term limits just frankly are a good idea for New Mexico as they are proposed? And I should say, the proposal here is to increase senator terms from 4 to 6 years, representative terms from 2 to 4 years, but make them capped at 3 years concurrently.
I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, how do I make this a non-political issue?
Okay.
So I'm thinking of this just from my heart.
Okay.
So number one, if you increase it to 6 years in 3 terms, that's 18 years. That's a generational thing anyway. I mean, if you're in for a generation of people. And actually, even the 3 4-year terms is a long time. So I think the question comes down to whether or not you trust us, the people, to be able to keep coming up with new people who want to perform public service. Mm-hmm. And is it a benefit to the state to offer that to us to be able to have more people, make it easier for them to perform public service, and not have to worry about somebody who's been entrenched in there forever. And I understand the argument being some of these people who are entrenched are very good at what they do. But does that mean that there are other people out there who are not? That's right. And I understand where the GOP at this point will think, well, yeah, we want to get rid of some of these people, right? And so, term limits, woohoo, let's do this, and let's get some new blood in there. So.
I speak specifically, Rebecca, of Senator Craig Brandt from Rio Rancho. He's the one pushing this. It's not a bill, it's more of a discussion point memorial to kind of get things going. He says it would allow for fresh ideas and more representation closer to the people. I'm not sure what he means about that. Do you know what he's talking about when he says representation closer to the people?
Well, I think as you see this swell of progressive candidates in particular are really running on the fact that they are of the people, so the Republican Party really has to do something to counter that as well. I think, to the point of, 12 years, 18 years, we've got legislators that have been in there. I think Bobby Gonzalez has been in there for over 30 years. And he's amazing. He's awesome. But I think giving them a longer pipeline, term limits. If you're doing your job, that's the time to cultivate new candidates. Right. I think though it has to go hand in hand with salarying them. That is, and I've done a full 180 on this over the years. I used to think that the people that you want in government are the people who want it so bad they're willing to do it for free. well, now I realize if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. Like, what we have is the people who are willing to do a job for free, you know, like, and it's, you're keeping a lot of people out. For instance, you know, if I ever wanted to run for the legislature, I couldn't, because I have to keep my family in the lifestyle they're accustomed to, and the per diem in the legislature does not, you know, would not cover that. But like, there are plenty of great ideas, plenty of brilliant people out there who could absolutely help us turn this ship around, but they're not going to do it for free because they know their worth.
That's right. I think it's an excellent point. We'll come back and touch on that, how this could possibly work in a part-time legislature. Andy, interestingly, a quote from Senator Brandt, quote, "I'm trying to be careful about what I've seen in other states that have done term limits, where if the term limit is too short, their bureaucrats end up running everything." I would agree with him. Continuing the quote, "and not the elected officials." So I was trying to figure out how to strike that balance. I'm going back to TJ's thought. Is that balance having 18 years in a row? That's a long time to be in office, and the same issues about incumbency still hold, it would seem to me, for those 3 terms, right? I mean,
yeah, I think it's important to point out that Craig Brandt is starting his 10th year in the legislature right at this point, right? And that's not a knock on anybody, specifically him, but just that, you know, there's this.
His constituents want him there.
Right. There's an idea of you know, fresh blood in there. On the other hand, it's starting from scratch, right? When you try to get somebody new in there, how do you get leadership roles, right? I mean, again, going to Senator Brandt, he's in a leadership role after so many years in there, and that's sort of how you naturally expect that to happen. So I think that's the other side of this argument is, you know, how do you create this sort of institutional knowledge when it's reset every, I mean, I guess it would be more than just 6 years, because you're talking about, you know, 2 or 3 terms, right? That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, again, it's going to be something that's going to come up again. I don't see it making it very far this year, especially without sort of professionalizing the legislature.
That's right. That's right. Speaking of which, to Rebecca's point, TJ Trout, if lengthening the session, does that make this more palatable? If we're at a 6-month scheme, a full-time scheme, or
the thing I hate about politics, and national politics and state politics, especially with 2-year terms, is these people are always perpetually running for office, and that's all they're concerned about. Right. It just drives me nuts, especially on a national level in the House of Representatives. That's just crazy. But to your point, the thing about that, I don't think you're going to have like a complete turnover of the legislature. Like, everybody is not going to term out at the same time. Right. So I think what we're going to see is we're still going to have leaders in power. Not everybody just, oh, you're all gone, so we got a bunch of newbies coming in, and so you all got to learn the ropes at the same time. I don't think that would probably happen. Rebecca, I agree with you though about paying people. I think it needs to be done. I think I think we need to have. There's too many problems in this state to have part-time people out there, and let's get some new blood in there. Meaning educators. You want to be a legislator? Let's have teachers be legislators and be able to afford to do that. Artists, you know.
Oh, God forbid. I know.
Yeah, come on.
An artist. Let's go back to where we started with that Common Cause poll. The public's way ahead of, it seems like, our legislature. The public wants this, guys. I mean, you're talking 70% support longer sessions. 46% of that was strongly support. The numbers who are at 64 want paid. It's not even close, Rebecca. The public wants this now. Are we just that far behind?
I think we are that far behind. Yeah. I think, we have to treat the legislature with the professionalism that we expect from members of the legislature. The fact that they don't have staff members, that they're relying on lobbyists to vet bills and help them figure out what their position is, like, that's wrong. We need to, they deserve it. I think we 100% need to extend the session, at least look at 60 days every year, because as long as there are bills trying to designate a state sent, there will be important bills that never make it down the road. Every memorial, every unfunded mandate, every smell, every song, every time a legislator sings happy birthday, like every single thing. If we're going to keep doing that, then they got to give themselves 60 days every year.
That's amazing, isn't it? Predictions on where you think this might land A lot of committees to get through, certainly.
Term limits part?
Term limits, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's going to get all that far. I think
Yeah.
that you see this a lot in different areas of the legislature, but they're essentially, voting on their own job, right? And I think that would take a.
Does it make the job more or less attractive to know your term limited out, Tej? I mean, Craig Brandt says it'll make for better legislators. I mean, would that be attractive to a different cut of person?
I think 18 years is a long time. It's like I said, it's a generational time. I think you could amass enough power, if that's what you're after, enough notoriety, and in 18 years, if you can't get something done worthwhile, then you got a real problem. And then again, you also have the opportunity to be voted out every 6 years.
That's a good point. It all comes down to that.
Instead of term limits, because then you've got lame ducks at the end, instead of term limits, make the job more appealing. Let the constituents decide when your term should be up.
Love that as a final word. Thanks again to our line panel as always this week. Be sure to let us know what you think about any of the topics the line covered on our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages, and catch any episode you may have missed on the PBS app on your Roku or smart TV. Here's a thought on the term limit discussion earlier. How about no term limits? Let me back up here. As you heard us discuss the idea, it's to increase representative terms from 2 years to 4 years and senatorial terms from 4 years to 6 years in our legislature. Now, both with 3-term caps. Now, sounds good? Not to me. 3 6-year terms in a row for a senator may as well be a lifetime appointment. It's not 18 years in a row, nothing less than what we have now, as TJ mentioned earlier. Same for the 12 years the amendment proposes for the House of Representatives. Now, you can do a lot of good in 12 or 18 years, but you can also clog a lot of pipelines in that time as well. And what frustrates me about term limits is the notion that a term limit will somehow magically change behavior, that somehow this ticking clock in the background will make for better governance. It doesn't. It's never been proven that way. What does work is the vote of the people in their idea who should come and go at their choosing. Now, maybe I'm biased growing up in a state with no term limits, and I've witnessed mayors enjoy terms of, block your ears, Senator Brandt, 16 years and then 24 years, and you wouldn't find a soul there to complain about it. Term limits are a white flag. Worse, the idea is insulting to anyone who takes the power of voting seriously. But here's the real problem. If Senator Brandt and the others of a like mind are saying they won't consider bills aimed at modernizing our 1920s style of governance unless there are term limits, that's not a good thing. One can now predict a scenario where a small group will stamp their feet and vote no on our desperately needed upgrade unless they get their way with term limits. That's not so good for progress, guys. We need to move forward. Thanks again for joining us, for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the viewers like you.